Kathleen, let me start with you. First of all, an incredible film. Congratulations again on your Emmy, well deserved.
Thank you.
Touches a lot of our souls, I think, while we were watching that. What was the inspiration for you to make this film? Why did you have to make this movie?
Just like you said, the story touched my soul. When I learned about the historical and the spiritual connection people of the African diaspora had always had with the water, I think it changed me forever. I had met Thaddeus, who you saw in the film, when I was interested in improving my swimming. I thought I would compete in a triathlon. And Thaddeus brought me to the International Swimming Hall of Fame, and it was there that I got a tour of their gallery. And they had an amazing art exhibition that chronicled the history of Africans in swimming. And it stayed with me. And later on, while I was researching another film, I was combing through the Wolfson archives, and I came across all of the beautiful archival footage that you see in the film. And it was a story that I had to tell.
Dr. Hobbs, as a historian, and you just heard how Kathleen saw these pictures and was really enlightened to what had happened here in South Florida during the Civil Rights era and even before that. So talk about what happened here and how that has continued to affect generations going forward.
Absolutely. You know, one of the things that we have to grapple with is the legacy of racism in this country and how it has impacted every aspect of life. And what I really talk about very often is this desire, even though lots has improved over time, but the impulse to both control and commodify Black bodies is very much built into the DNA of this country. And as an extension of that, there has been a desire to control or limit leisure on the part of people of African descent. We are not used to seeing Black folks in a state where they're not working. That is why they are valuable to us. And so Black leisure, Black joy are things that historically have been incredibly, incredibly limited. And so you see that manifest at so many different arenas. And so when we talk about the beginnings of Jim Crow in the South and in this country, of course, we talk about schools. Many people know that story. But the fact that even leisure was segregated, I think, is something that people fail to appreciate. And so I think what Ms. Dean has done in this fantastic film is allowed us an opportunity to interact with that. There are stories like the one we talk about with the Mizell and Johnson Park now, whether we're talking about Virginia Key Beach. There's countless stories throughout the United States of the fight for integration. But the other side of that coin, too, and I think it's very interesting, is that Black folks have always been able to do for ourselves. And so there's a very long history, too, of Black people creating spaces of leisure and purchasing beaches for themselves. Very familiar with the story of Abraham Lincoln Lewis, who was one of the first Black millionaires here in the state of Florida. He founded the Afro-American Life Insurance Company in Jacksonville and purchased a beach that he named American Beach, that is now Amelia Island. And that there was a really long history there of Blacks from around the country being able to come and enjoy. There were hotels and clubs and restaurants. Mary McLeod Bethune, many of us know her as the founder of Bethune-Cookman University, but she too saw fit to purchase a beach in 1945, Bethune Beach. Many of us in Florida have heard of Silver Springs, but maybe fewer of us know that there was also a segregated component to that in Paradise Park. Where people of African descent were able to go and enjoy and learn and swim, and the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts were able to go out. So it's a very mixed and troubled history that more people, I'm afraid, don't know about, but perhaps through this really wonderful film they will get to know more about.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Morris, talk a little bit about the NAACP and the role that they have played in helping with this issue and with those segregated beaches and pools.
Well, you know, being the oldest and largest and baddest and boldest civil rights organization in this country, you know, founded, you know, February, 1909, one of the goals of, the people like the Eula Johnsons, the Dr. Mizell, even if we take it into Miami-Dade County, Garth Reeves as well, just like the lunch counters, one of the things that the NAACP wanted to do, begin to challenge. Lawson, Thomas, who was a part of the Urban League of Greater Miami, one of his goals was to begin to challenge this whole notion of segregation on the beaches. And of course, May 9th, 1945, Miami-Dade started this whole Reeves Wade-ins. Garth Reeves being a part of the NAACP, knowing the legacy of the organization and the rationale that, white supremacy cannot stand. And so as a result, doing his part in challenging that the beaches or going to Hollow Beach was a duty and obligation. We're paying taxes here in South Florida. Why can't we go to the beaches, a place that gave us serenity, calmness, places where people find their happiness, going to the beaches, hearing the water. Sometimes people say, go to the beach and just sit. You just listen how the water talks to you and calms you. And so as a result, the NAACP became very instrumental with these leaders, because when we talk about these leaders, they're people who've been involved in the NAACP, lifetime members. And so their goal was to file lawsuits against this state to say, look, we need to make sure that those who are black and brown are able to go to the beaches. Even though we had black beaches, and of course we had Virginia Key beaches, there were issues with the currents, all those beaches. And they're dangerous. And so as a result, once again, we're fighting back. So, in 1961, when the NAACP filed their lawsuit, their goal was to begin to integrate the beaches, give an opportunity for those black and brown bodies to begin to enjoy the same services that were offered to those who were white. Using that 14th Amendment, the Equal Protection Clause. Are these beaches, we're separated, but we're not equal. And so that became important. So NAACP has been at the forefront of the struggle for civil rights, making sure that people who are part of this community, black and brown and all people, are able to enjoy the legacies of what all men are created equal. What does it mean for us, enjoying those freedoms? And so they're doing their part in making sure that happens.
Of course, there's an economic consequence to all of this, too. We saw from the film that historically Africans relied on the water for many aspects of life. Here we live in an area, as we all know, surrounded by water and an economy that relies on tourism dollars tied to the multi-billion-dollar marine and boating industry, or what's also known as the blue economy. So, Dr. Hobbs, talk a little bit about that and those economic opportunities that have been missed because of African Americans not being able to get into those industries.
Sure. I think it's complicated depending on what period you look at that. There is a very long history of, again, when you look at, for our time here on these shores, when you look at the uses of black bodies for labor. Black people were employed in maritime trades, both as enslaved people and as free people. And so there is a very rich and very long history there. When we talk about the period after the end of slavery, I think some of that does continue. You do see African Americans continuing in some of those same trades. But again, we come back to the impact of segregation and the fact that they were more desired as laborers. They did not really have the opportunity to enjoy and to be business owners. The flip side of that, though, kind of goes back to what I said about the ownership opportunity. There were many. Famously, W.E.B. Du Bois in the NAACP, it was his belief in the value, the economic value of segregation, helping African Americans to develop their own businesses that caused a historic split with the organization. But that's really what you see when I talk about Abraham Lincoln Lewis, when I talk about Mary McLeod Bethune and all the others. They took the opportunity to become landowners and investing in beachfront properties to create what was missing. In the same way that when we think about Abraham Lincoln Lewis, part of the reason that he was able to do that is because racism meant that mainstream insurance companies would not sell policies to black folks. There was a widespread belief based on institutional racism within the field of actuary science that after being emancipated, black people simply would not live very long without white supervision. And so as a matter of fact, they would not. It was a bad business investment based on that data, which we now know was invalid and slanted, that there was no need to sell life insurance to black folks. Abraham Lincoln Lewis, Alonzo Herndon, and other black men primarily, and some women, went into that field, and that's how they made their money. That's the money that he used to buy the beach. So it's a very complicated operation. One thing I will chime in there about the video from St. Augustine. Not many people know that Florida Memorial was located in St. Augustine during that year. They were there from 1918 to 1968, a span of about 50 years. And it was actually students from Florida Memorial initially in March of 1960 that staged a sit-in under the leadership of Thomas White, who was a graduate of what was then Florida Norma and Industrial College for Negroes. He was the campus lead for the NAACP. He was dismissed from his job for starting that ruckus. The president didn't think it was wise to continue, but it was later under the leadership of Dr. Robert Haling as an independent dentist who came in and led the effort in 63 and 64. So it very well may be that there were Florida Memorial College students who were there at that weigh-in participating, as they did in many of the demonstrations during the fall of 1963 and 1964. And while they were successful in not only integrating in St. Augustine, but the scenes that played out there were being broadcast across the nation and fueled the Congress and ultimately President Lyndon Johnson in signing the Civil Rights Act of 1964. They lost the war. And there was a hostility towards that college that ended up forcing them to move to their new home in South Florida. So it's a very complicated history there.
And talk a little bit about that video, because Kathleen, you said you found that from the Wolfson Moving Image and Archives. How powerful was that for you to kind of dive into all of that history and find that film and see what was going on?
It really struck me because, I grew up in a family where water was very much a part of our lives. Every summer, was spent at a beach or a swimming pool or a lake. And my father was born and raised in Hollandale Beach, Florida. And it was on a summer vacation trip down here to Florida from New York, where I grew up, that we were at the beach, and I realized that, my father did not know how to swim. And it struck me in a very deep, sad, visceral way. And to connect the dots and find out about that history and that hostility in this country that denied people like my father growing up here, in South Florida, access to the water, and what that could have meant, historically for other families. Because you're denied access, your family members don't feel safe with you accessing the beach. So in black families, as Thaddeus said in part of the film, the safety protocol for black families would be to tell their children to stay away from the water. So that very much could have been my history, had I not, grown up with a mother who was a swimmer. But it just struck me very deeply, and also the fact that black people weren't allowed access to the beach unless you had this ID card. And every time I show this film and I hear stories of people, even today, who are still dealing with discrimination, in waterways, at a hotel pool or a beach or even a local swimming pool here in Fort Lauderdale, it just lets us know that we still have so far to go.
It hits them hard, I would imagine. Dr. Morris, I've seen you nodding. Talk a little bit about the economic impact and also the issue too with the card. I mean, that was really. How do your students feel? I mean, you teach African American history at the college.
And I think most of the students are surprised. Because I think that they don't realize that America has such an ugly history. But I think it's a history that we have to tell. Because I think it's important to make sure that we kind of get rid of the generational curses around the water so that people can feel comfortable. Because I think that we all enjoy the water because we want to go there to have fun, to enjoy. The amount of people who come to South Florida when, we had Will Smith say, "Welcome to Miami." I mean, everyone got excited. Everyone wants to come to South Beach.
Right.
And so, I think for our students, I think it becomes difficult because they're like, but why? Why is that so? Because when we think of South Florida now, it's definitely very diverse, and it's different races, different cultures, people from all around the world, but not realizing that I tell students that Florida was still the South. And that because it was still the South, there was still this issue of racism that impacted, South Florida. And so when people like Garth Reeves and Eula Johnson and all the others risked their lives, they knew they were threatened. They knew they were going to be arrested for disorderly conduct. But it was their reality to say we want to make sure that we begin to reclaim what had been taken away from our community for so long, and being able to have that opportunity. And I think the film kind of tells that story. It gives students that context and why the water was so important to this community, and how we can begin to reclaim that of who we are and what we have been for so long.
Did you want to say something?
I did, just sort of tagging on with the doctors are saying about the joy of water. We are water. We are made up of at least 60% water, and we come from water. So it's normal that we seek it out. Sooner or later, we're all going to want to access the water.
It's natural.
It's
natural.
It's
right?
natural.
Yeah.
And to piggyback on what the Emmy Award-winning filmmaker has said, you said something that resonated with me around water and danger, because that was my association with water. I think for many people, when you go to these pools, when you go to the beaches, it was perhaps an opportunity to have what could be a dangerous interaction with a white person. And so those became spaces that were very difficult to negotiate. In my own research on lynching and racial violence, I write about the lynching of Willie James Howard, who was a 15-year-old boy who, for the alleged crime of writing a love note to a white girl, was forced to jump to his death in front of his father into the Swanee River. That changed the relationship of Black people to that water. I talked to a relative of his that told the story of the opening of the pool for white people in Live Oak, and Willie James Howard and his lynching became a cautionary tale to young Black men in that community. They would not even walk down the street where the pool was for fear that they would be accused of ogling a white girl in her swimsuit. They avoided the area completely. And so I was reminded of that. And then the other side of that, when we talk about water avoidance, is for Black women attempting to maintain European standards of beauty as best as we can achieve. And water and Black hair don't mix. I think for Black women, and perhaps that's something that the public health panel will get into, that has been a barrier to that outlet for enjoyment and for our physical exercise.
For Black women, yeah. Well, we have a special guest with us in the audience tonight who I want to bring into the conversation. Derek Davis is a local historian and retired curator for the Old Dillard Museum. Thank you so much for being here. Come on up. So tell us why it's so important for us to have this conversation, to look back at our history and to educate everyone here in South Florida about what happened with African Americans in swimming.
Well, history is important. Africans have this concept they call Sankofa. And Sankofa means to go back and fetch it. And what it means is go back in the past and get the information you need to make the future better. And history has a way of letting us look at because some of our problems are common, they keep recurring in different ways. And sometimes it's actually easier, as bad as some of the history is, it's actually easier to look at some of the problems when you're looking at them from a historical perspective and then comparing them to now. Because almost anything you do, you want to compare it to something. And if you don't have the history to compare it to, you can't make valid decisions about what's happening now. So it's very important to have those historical perspectives of things if you actually want to solve problems now. And that's what society is about, is how do you solve problems? How do you get to answers that are good for the overall growth of the whole community? I know there's a scholar, Cheikh Anta Diop, one thing he talks about when he talks about society, going back to the family unit, to the clan, to the city, to the state. He said all these things were formed to help to solve problems. That's what they are for. And when you look at those problems, that's how history can help you to say, we want to come up with the best society, the best families, the best nations, the best world. And history can help us by looking at it, because when you're in the now, you really don't look at all the ramifications of what's going on. When you get a historical thing, you get to see like a 360 view of it, and then you compare it to where you are now, and you're saying, are we really better, and can we improve it? So history is very, very important, I think.
Indeed it is. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate your perspective.
I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much. Dr. Morris, you teach students. You know, you have these kids in your classroom who we hope are watching us right now on Facebook or on YouTube, and you can question them, you know, when you go back to class, right? Talk a little bit about young people now, and what are they saying to you? What is the impact of the history they're learning on them? And what kinds of solutions or things do they talk about with you?
Well, I think one of the things I tell my students all the time is that you have to learn from the past, live in the present, and plan for the future. And I think the doctor said it correct. You know, history is so important, you know, to our students, and it's a great opportunity for students to kind of find themselves in this fabric, whatever it may mean for you. And what students are saying is that, you know, why do things occur like that? Because for them, they can't begin to wrap their minds around such a disdained history of America. And I say that, you know, it's important to look at it because you need to know that what has happened in the past is your responsibility to begin to make sure it doesn't happen in the future. You know, it's called a call to action. You know, we stand on the shoulders of giants like Johnsons and the Mizelles and the Reeves and all the others who have given their lives for us who are living here today. And it becomes their responsibility because when we look at a lot of these movements that have happened for changes have been students. And they can be the ones that can begin to make the future a better place for others. And so I think they're ready. You know, and I think it's very important for us as historians and as people who are part of this community to begin to continue to educate our students about what has occurred. You know, not ashamed. And I think for a long time when we think about this whole notion of water safety and about water, you know, especially as, you know, being from Black families, you know, it's one of those things that, you know, don't go over there because if you go there, this may happen to you. You know, it's such a fear. And I think that fear plays a big part in how we begin that mental psyche. And it begins to become internalized. And then we pass it on to generations. And so this is the point, I think that's what the film is trying to, we need, the buck stops here now. We're going to address it, we're going to embrace it, and we're going to kind of move forward. And how can we help our students realize that this history, even though it may seem odd, may seem oftentimes scary, in the future may seem scary, but holding each other's hand, each of us, we can make this world a better place. And I think that becomes our goal and our responsibility to help liberate our students to the next level. And I think that's what this film did. You know, it liberated people who have been sometimes felt in shackles or in chains for so long.
Wow. Dr. Hobbs, do you hear that from students as well?
Yeah, I think something that I actively try to do, especially as I have become more active in the social justice space at historically Black colleges, is to remind our students of their long legacy, the long legacy of historically Black colleges and universities, and more specifically their students, also their faculty members, and leading the path forward. As I mentioned, it was the students at Florida Memorial College in 1960 who kind of sparked the things that we saw that came a few years later. We can talk about Wilhelmina Jakes and Carrie Patterson at Florida A&M University, from which I graduated, and sparking the bus boycotts that took place there in 1957. That list goes on and on. So helping them to understand, number one, their role as young people, the birthright that they've inherited for that, and for them to, with that knowledge and history, number one, to position themselves, to understand where they stand, and to mime the line and making sure that things are moving forward in progress. That we have the past as a measure. And I think that's something that if we're paying attention to that history, it really does help us to know and to mark where we're making progress and where we may be moving in the wrong direction. And that's why it's so important for us to have these conversations about the past.
And then the film is such a jumping off point, is it not?
It is.
What has the reaction of people been, Black and white people, anybody who's seen the film? What have they said to you?
Some people have been moved to tears. I tried hard to make a film that wasn't going to re-traumatize anyone, so I hope they were tears of joy. Because we, as people of African descent, have that history. So there's the Sankofa. We can go back and we can reclaim that. And it's so important for us to connect with the water for so many reasons, for health and wealth and wellness. So people have embraced it. It's been a joy. And as I show it, around the country, and I get to talk to people, and we're able to dispel the negative myths and the stereotypes that Black people don't swim by showing that, yes, we have a rich history and a culture of swimming in our community, and we need to reclaim that culture and history.
Very well said. Thank you so much. Yes.
I would just add that you did a very good job in not re-traumatizing. As a matter of fact, high marks for the soundtrack. The music I found to be very relaxing, along with the visuals, the integration of the poetry, I think, has that effect. And I'm reminded in these moments now, after what we've just lived through in Buffalo, New York, of the need for Black people to rest and to heal, and that sites near the water can be those places of calm where we can go to relax, to replenish our spirits as we continue to deal with this trauma. So I think that you've given us all a really beautiful gift and the opportunity to reflect and reclaim.
Very well said. Thank you so much. Loved having this panel. This was great. Thank you so much for your insight.